Hey YouTube, thanks for tuning in to the very first episode of my beginner series. If you don't know anything about 3D printing or you're just getting started, then you've come to the right place. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start with the basics. What even is 3D printing? Well, 3D printing falls under additive manufacturing, which is the process of building a 3D object by placing material down layer by layer in succession until a 3D object is formed. On the contrary, subtractive manufacturing is when you start with a stock of material and remove that material little by little until a 3D object is formed, like a CNC machine. There are various types of processes that fall under 3D printing. Since my channel is mainly going to focus on the FDM or FFF 3D printing process, I'm going to talk about that today. So, for an FDM 3D printer, here's what's pretty much happening. Picture a hot glue gun. Okay, so picture a hot glue gun. Everyone's used one, but imagine drawing a circle on a piece of paper with a hot glue gun, waiting for it to dry, then drawing another circle on top of it. And then you repeat this process a certain amount of times, and eventually you'll have a cylindrical tower made out of hot glue. It wouldn't be that clean, but you get what I'm saying. So, essentially that's what's going on here with an FDM 3D printer. You have a nozzle that's being heated up at a temperature that you set depending on what type of material you're printing with. There's a bunch of different materials, each have different temperature settings that are recommended for printing. So you set the temperature and a motor feeds in raw material and extrudes it out of the nozzle, similar to a hot glue gun. And basically the firmware on the printer is what tells everything what to do, and the file that you upload to the printer that I'll talk about in a little bit is what gives the 3D printer all of its instructions. So it moves in an X plane, a Y plane, and a Z plane. It puts down one layer, and then the nozzle moves up, and then it puts down another layer. So now that you guys somewhat understand what's happening and how the object is actually being created, let's talk about the other end of things. So what's actually happening between the PC and the 3D printer? Well, all 3D printers typically come with a software for your computer or Mac or whatever called a slicer. Now, there's a ton of other slicers out there that you could either purchase or download for free outside of your manufacturer's recommended one or the one they made. So don't ever think you're limited as far as slicer options go. So on the back end of things, your 3D printer is actually running some pretty advanced firmware. Now, firmware is the software that resides on the 3D printer. As new users, you guys don't really have to worry about this much right now, but I will say that the beauty of this open source community with 3D printing is that there are so many options you could configure with your firmware. You could even try different types of firmware that have been specifically developed for your 3D printer. You could just tweak certain settings in your printer's firmware, which obviously will be another video in the future, so I'll elaborate on that then. You new guys don't have to worry about it right now. But essentially all you need to know is the firmware resides on your printer. You don't really ever see it, and what that does is control all of the hardware on your 3D printer. So guys, you might be wondering where these files even come from. How do you obtain a 3D file? Well, there are so many resources at your disposal because most of this community is open source and it's incredibly generous. So there are countless websites that you could go on and download these STL files from. The most commonly used one, which I'm sure you've heard of, is Thingiverse.com. Now, I'm going to show you guys what that website looks like in case some of you've never seen it before. Okay, everyone, so this is the website I was talking about. It's Thingiverse.com. I'll put the link for it in the description below. So basically, there's a couple websites like this, but Thingiverse just happens to be one of the most popular ones. They've been around for a very long time, so they're pretty well revered. But basically, you could search through their collections or anything like that, but if you, let's say you wanted to print a vase, it seems to be a common print that people choose for aesthetics and stuff like that, but you search vase and a ton of these results come up. You select one, and you know, if you like how it looks, usually they'll show different angles. This one has two different versions, so they'll have 2 different files for you to download. But it's also cool, you could go into this thing view and actually visualize it in a 3D environment, so that's pretty nifty. But anyway, you go down here to thing files and you download one of these STL files. So I download that now. So once you have the 3D file downloaded, you're gonna go to your slicer. I'm using Simplify 3D, so I'm gonna go to import, and this is the file that I just downloaded, so I'm gonna load that in. And okay, that's a little bigger than I expected, so I'm just gonna scale that down to 50%. Alright, so this is the 3D file that I just saw on the website, and you could do this with just about anything, and it's definitely a very cool tool to have. So once you become a little bit more experienced with your 3D printer, and you become very familiar with the slicer and how to output the right settings, and you just get very comfortable with using your 3D printer, then you could start exploring options to getting into 3D modeling. Now, some of you might be going into this with experience in 3D modeling, which is just a huge plus for you. But for you newcomers, I recommend sticking with the free stuff that you could print off Thingiverse and just getting a hang of things in the very beginning. But don't worry, I will have a video on 3D modeling softwares, and there are a lot of free options now that are actually pretty sophisticated. Alright guys, I hope you found that video useful and valuable. If you did, please consider liking it below and subscribing to the channel. Now for you beginners, I hope I did a good enough job of explaining everything clearly for you guys. So stay tuned, because in my next video, I will be doing another Prussiman giveaway, and I hope you guys tune in for that. So thanks again.